The Locker Room podcast is brought to you by the people from DSS Coaching. I'm Ciaran Deely. We run an online CPD service for Gaelic games coaches. If you want to sign up to our services, where we provide weekly and daily coaching resources for our 700 strong group of coaches, community of coaches, head over onto our website www.dsscoaching.ie. By listening to this pod, by being a supporter of this podcast, you can get 20% off your first monthly or annual subscription. Use the coupon code POD20, that's POD20, to get 20% off our membership services over on dsscoaching.ie. I'm Ciaran Deely from the Locker Room podcast. Welcome to the Locker Room podcast. I'm your host, Ciaran Deely from DSS Coaching. Today we're looking at the role of the assistant coach and how they support a head coach within a team environment. Joining me is Ross Bennett, Head of Integrated Performance at QPR. In this episode, we're going to cover how the assistant coach works alongside the head coach, the role of the assistant coach in training, some of their responsibilities on match day, how they support player development, and how assistant coaches through such things as analysis, operational issues, and other supporting roles. Ross, as always.
Thanks, Ciaran. Thanks for the intro. Delighted to be back with you doing a podcast today on probably something that is close to our hearts in terms of how we've worked together. So, it should be nice to give some insights.
Yeah, so we've probably supported each other at different times as regards like a head coach, an assistant coach, or a head of sports science, and a maybe assistant or a normal sports scientist. And yeah, you've dipped into the coaching world in terms of football and a bit of Gaelic football. And obviously I've dipped into Gaelic football and football coaching as well, and assistant coaching. So yeah, plenty of personal experiences.
For sure. Look forward to the chat, mate.
Okay, so we've split this episode into 5 different sections. The first one, we're just going to touch on working with the coach. So Ross, just firstly, from your experience, what does a strong working relationship between a head coach and an assistant coach look like?
Kiers, I think it's a really, really interesting dynamic that you have to get right, because obviously the head coach comes with the head on the chopping block, essentially, with how the team are performing and how the progress is going. But as you know, like, a head coach is only as good as their staff and the playing cohort, and the assistant coach is pivotal in that. So the first thing for me is, like, they must have a really solid, like, relationship, professional relationship that often is personally aligned to their views in general in sport. And I think they're the ones that work quite well. And the other one is that there's a big emphasis on trust with that person. So, like, if the head coach decides to go in a direction, there's the opportunity to discuss things and collaborate and mold each other in terms of the direction you want to go in. But as soon as the head coach says we're going to go in this direction, you have to be aligned, and you have to go with that person. And having that person's back at all times is imperative, because the gaps then can start to come out and players will jump on that and the messages aren't, like, coherent. So they're the 2 biggest, like, principles, I think, that work from a professional standpoint.
Yeah, and I know previously you spoke a little bit about within the performance support setting of the high challenge, high support kind of system. And I guess this can work within the coaching setup as well, because like my next question was going to be around, and you just briefly touched on it as well, that how assistant coaches can challenge and support the head coach in equal measure, and while respecting the final decision that obviously should at least speak or sit with the head coach.
Yeah, it's a really, really important part, because you don't just want to be an assistant coach that just goes with the head coach all the time. I think that's where you get limitations in your program, and you get a few blind spots, because you're literally essentially putting everything into one person's viewpoint. So being able to challenge respectfully around like direction of travel for players, maybe methods that you're going to go around communication with players, maybe styles of play, maybe how we're going to overcome, like, opposition, anything within the program, really, how things are integrated from support service, how you bring players back from injury. All these things, I think, can be really challenging and collaborative amongst the coaching team. And then there's a real fine skill to this. Like, I always find like depending on who the head coach is, sometimes like they don't like being challenged publicly because they're a bit of a name hold. They want to, be seen as a bit of a figurehead in the organization. So like make sure you do it privately and make sure you do it when you think it's going to be received well. But again, once the decision's made, then you support the coach 100%. And it's really important you do that, irrespective of where your journey is. Your role in that moment is to support that head coach and do what you think's best for the organization.
Yeah. True. I have experienced myself this season where I'm involved with QPR under 14 girls team. And there's certainly a lead coach, John, who's been in the role for 4 years. And then I guess I'm assisting him. And I do really get it that like there are levels to the relationship. So you 100% need a very strong professional relationship and nothing should get in the way of that. But it's even better if you have a good personal relationship as well. And we experienced that with London Gaelic football team because it just means that it goes beyond the professional, that you're looking out for each other as well and
Yeah.
supporting each other. And you're probably more, as a head coach, you're probably more open to like telling your assistant, some of your worries and throwing ideas around more. And probably the assistant coach has more security there, has more confidence in that. Okay, if they throw out an idea or even if they criticize the head coach, he's not going to take it in the wrong way. So that personal relationship can actually help in those situations.
Yeah, and I think the personal relationship comes with like alignment of general direction of travel of how you think. So, we got on really well because we had really, really aligned views on how we would physically prepare someone, how we would technically coach someone, how we would manage a group of players, how we'd communicate. If you're miles apart from all of those things, the duo probably won't work. Although it's nice to have a little bit of balance and yang.
Yeah.
I think you can't be completely misaligned because I just think that relationship just won't be there.
Yeah. And even it can be difficult if you're two very different types of people. Like
Yeah.
I have had experience in the Gaelic world, I won't say where, but where myself and another person were just different in how we viewed a lot of things or how we lived our lives. And we tried to keep it as professional as possible for as long as possible, but in the end, it did become difficult. And actually, that's not in London, but yeah, it can be tricky like that. So I do get like, especially when you speak about your philosophy of preparing the team, and like if I'm thinking like, for instance, if you're involved with a team and as the head coach, you like to be very close to the players, very personable, very open about their development and everything like that as people as well as players. And then your assistant coach is just not that at all and like
Yeah.
just wants to focus on winning. It's going to be very difficult to maintain even a professional relationship in that case, I think.
Yeah, I think if it's the other way around, so the head coach is a little bit standoffish and demands standards, but there's an agreement and actually an alignment that the assistant would knit the connection together. I think that's where that can work. But the two, the assistant and the head have to be able to have those honest conversations. And as you said, like sometimes be a bit of a sounding board for the head coach. Like we're under pressure. Like I'm just going to let you know, like I've had a few conversations with the board or the chairman, or things aren't going well. The players aren't too happy. How do we solve this together? What's your thoughts? Like that's really important that vulnerability can come out as a head coach.
Yeah, and the head coach having the confidence to be able to do that and say that. Okay, next section, we're just going to look at the assistant coach's role and responsibilities in training sessions then. So firstly, what are some of the most valuable ways that an assistant coach can contribute to both the planning and also the delivering of training sessions?
Yeah, really good question. And when we spoke about this briefly off air, like there's loads of scenarios that go through my mind around like how they can contribute. I think it comes purely down to what's the strengths of each individual. So if I've worked with, let's say, three or four head coaches and you being one of them, like everyone would have their strengths around planning, around delivery, their biases of what they like coaching, i.e., they might be attacking bias coach. They might like a certain. Is this sounding familiar now, Piers? Um, so I think it's really important and a skill set. And this is probably why like duos stay together because they get a nice balance and they think the formula works. But like when I work with a coach, it's like even one that I work with 15, 16 to QPR, What is he really good at? Well, he's really good at getting this sort of info and this type of practice to the players. So that's his super strength. Like, let him be excellent at that and support him, support the messages, get around the practice, drive the practice, make sure you're present. What was he not so good at? Well, maybe the planning side in terms of like the timings. Maybe I need to support him a little bit with the planning situation. Maybe the amount of activities we're doing or how we flow from one to the other. So I can support there. And then maybe there's a little bit of gap from a defensive perspective. So I might pick up those type of players and focus a bit more on an IDP perspective around that. So there's loads of ways you can do it, but I think quickly find out what the head coach is strong at, let them be super strong, support it, and then try and fill in a little bit of the gaps.
Yeah, I, I have that with my current role where John was a centre back, an old school centre back. I was obviously not. I'm more of an attacking player in both football and Gaelic football in any sport. Um, and it is amazing. Like even it just happens subconsciously with you that when I look at a performance or a move, straight away I'll go to the attacking. I'll just see great pass, great cross, good finish, etc., etc. And automatically he'll mention something about, okay, but what about our defense? Were they set up correctly there or their positioning? And he will go and speak to that player about,
Yeah,
listen, you need to be 5 yards a little bit higher up the pitch there. And I'm like, I didn't even notice that. I wasn't looking for that. I
yeah,
was focusing on like the ball, and maybe that's my naivety and inexperience. But it is interesting that even when it's not even you're trying to do it, you just do it subconsciously. And I guess that leads into my second question in this section about supporting training. But like, how important is your skill set as a coach in terms of as well? Like, you might have had some experience in the sports science world or S&C, or now there are lots of these new roles of kind of coach analyst that you're looking at. So maybe, the performance analyst world or wherever you've come from, like how important is that then in terms of you supporting training and the whole setup?
yeah. I think it's really important, and you see the assistant coaches typically become the communicator or like the link between head coach messaging and then support staff as well. So I think that's definitely part of your role to knit. I always see it as like the head coach's role is to make sure the vehicle, so the organization, is moving in the right direction at the right speed. As an assistant coach, then you have to make sure all the individual parts are then coming together to help that vehicle. So you need
I
to make
like
sure each player
that.
gets the right support, i.e., tactical info, technical info, IDP development. You need to make sure that the performance staff get the support and the messaging and physical themes are being translated into that vehicle at the right time. And you need to make sure that everybody from an organization is just knitted together really. So I think it's really important. And depending on the way that head coach goes about it, like they might go full throttle with just like team. So as a team, we're going to drive intensity. We're going to work really hard. We're going to work on these principles. Or they might dip into individuals where you can then start to dip into the other one. So it's a really, really unique skill, assistant coach. And a lot of assistant coaches want to become the head coach. They do. But
Yeah,
it's really important that you just become a really good assistant because if you
yeah,
try and I guess overstep or overlook, there'll be loads of things under the surface that will just get missed.
yeah. I'm laughing because I'm thinking of the Newcastle United Eddie Howe and his assistant. I can't remember his name, but he
I actually met him on
did
holiday
you
in Turkey. Yeah, I can't remember his name either, but he had great teeth.
Well, actually, it's interesting because he gets criticized a lot. That sometimes he's the first guy to step up and shake the hand of the opposition manager.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
think Unai Emery for Aston Villa, like, refused to shake his hand and he went kind of straight to Eddie Howe, because the level of respect and stuff like that. But then I did read an article about him and like he's a good guy. He's a
Mhm.
lot of experience in the game and Eddie Howe was asked about it, I think, and he just said something like, look, that's his passion, and we work well together, and yeah, but he's a bit of a lightning rod for fans, opposition
Yeah.
fans
Yeah,
sometimes.
well, anyone who's played under him, we got a couple of players that played at Bournemouth under them, and they said both of them are exceptional. So,
Brilliant.
like,
Yeah,
really well respected in the game. But yeah,
yeah.
from the outside in, it's an interesting perception.
I suppose as well, like a coach who has a bit of experience of sports science or S&C or something will naturally gravitate towards, maybe doing like the physical warm up, some locomotive skills, maybe some advice about reps and sets and timings of like small
Yeah.
sided games or stuff like that. I'm thinking of in a kind of in a GA sense where you don't have, all your support system of S&C coaches, or in a non-league football sense, where again you don't have your sports scientist on the sideline, let's say.
Yeah, and I guess then their role would be like provide an appropriate and thorough like intro to training, whether that be physical or however you want to do that. But then
Yeah,
also like set the scene for what the head coach wants to do. So
yeah,
if he
yeah.
wants to go into some really good attacking phase of play, make sure that the technical work might have a link and yeah, links into that.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Okay, just moving on to match day roles then. So, firstly, what responsibilities should the assistant coach or would they typically take on in match preparation? Let's say getting ready for the games throughout the week and then during the actual game.
Yeah. So I think on match day, like the role is really clear. Like do everything you can to make the head coach's job really easy on match day to deliver like inspiring info to players, set the team up, and manage the team. So essentially, like anything to do pre-game, I think the head coach shouldn't be involved until the talk. So whether
Mhm.
you have your talk
Yeah,
pre-warm up, whether you have your talk post pre-game, like let the head coach come in and have a real impact on your players, have an effect on them. So be in charge of equipment, make sure the kit's there. If you need to do the kit at certain levels,
yeah,
make sure the comms have gone out, any late comms around traffic and your direction and where you're going to, logistical stuff. And then make sure your warm up set up and ready to go and you've got your timing spot on. You've got water available, you've got your medic available, you link all the staff together and get the players physically and mentally prepared to go into that changing room and listen to a head coach to deliver some info. And then I think once the info is delivered and once the head coach has kind of revealed the plan, it's up to you then to reinforce those messages really strongly. Like, what are the 4 to 5 key messages you need to get across to win this game? What do we
yeah,
think we need to impact and what players we need to impact? So again, it's kind of like it's kind of taking the master plan and then making sure that you align on like key bits of that plan that can just constantly get reinforced. And that gets reinforced in warm up, it gets reinforced in one-to-one conversations, by drive-bys. Drive-bys, what I mean
yeah,
by drive-bys is stuff in training where you're just having a little communication as they're doing activity.
yeah.
Yeah, so yeah,
Yeah. Before you go into within the game, during the game, because I think
yeah,
we'll treat that as a separate one then, because this is really interesting. But I do like that idea of like the manager slash head coach stays out of things until that last kind of message, because I see in the GA world where the head coach slash manager is like completely integrated into the warm up, and sometimes like they're doing practices or doing drills, and sometimes my worry even, and I have experience as a player, let's call it recently myself, where like the head coach nearly treats the warm up as like a coaching session, a
yeah,
training session, like talking about all these different best practices, and that's fine. But the more I'm involved, like as both a player and a coach, I'm thinking of match days, like physically, mentally, technically, tactically prepare for the game. And then just that messaging has to be just short, like so
yeah,
few messages and short. Because it's since I stepped back into the game myself as a player, I realized that I don't want to listen to loads and loads of stuff. I just don't. I just want to like physically kind of get ready, do my kicking, my technical work, whatever, and then just a couple of little snapshots, and that's it. And
yeah,
as soon as the 3 points turn into like five, and then another coach adds in more, and then a player, the captain, fine, but then maybe another player, like all of a sudden you're at 10 messages before the
yeah,
game, and then
yeah,
another 10 at halftime, and so I do like that idea of the head coach staying out of stuff and then
yeah.
just coming in with the few important critical messages.
Yeah, interesting because I've seen it done different ways, especially at underage level, because you haven't got the resource of like a coach
Mm.
taking everything and a head coach. But
Yeah,
I think that when the head coach takes the warm up, that's for them. That's because
yeah,
that's their happy place, and they like to coach So
Mm.
actually, like if you're in the warm up saying about, if you're out there rolling the pitch and like you start to water down the message you're going to give later on. So I think you're spot on. Like all the principles that you work on should be worked on all the time. Like that should be your philosophy that you carry.
Yeah.
Then that should be done at training. So you're talking about angles, you're talking about how to move the ball, we're talking about defensive principles. Like that gets done all in the week. The 3 points that you make specific to this game are the most important messages you want to give to the players last. And then any individual messages, I actually think then the head coach, assistant coach can give one message max to per player, but that's not
Yeah.
done in a group setting because
Yeah.
otherwise it becomes 12 things you're trying to get through.
Yeah, because I do see it, and the lower down the levels and the underage more so. I see this where, like, each individual player's, let's call it IDP, individual development plan, or whatever you want to say, like critical points for those players are listed out.
Yeah,
And like, if you think that it, when you step back, it's like, okay, that's fine. You're running through each player, but ultimately, what you've done, like you say, you've diluted it because you've given your three critical team points, for instance, but then you've spoken another like at least 11 points. It could
yeah,
be 15 points or even more. And players are listening to that. So there's a danger they'll forget that critical
yeah,
message that you want them to focus on. So yeah, okay, that's an interesting one. Secondly, then under the match day roles,
yeah,
what about during the game? And I suppose I'm thinking of in terms of both like an underage where you've got two people just standing on the sideline, and I suppose
yeah,
it's going back to maybe what we said about like somebody's focus, maybe attack or defense or whatever, but also in terms of a bigger Gaelic football game or a non-league football game where there's a bit of crowd there and there's a bit of bite to the game, and you know
yeah. It,
psychologically it's more of a challenge.
so when I came through the academy system, like I came through at Chelsea in terms of coaching,
Yeah.
and we used to have a saying called one voice,
Mm,
where only the lead coach would be able to project info onto the pitch.
yeah.
Now, I have, and we use that quite a lot actually. Like we use that QPR, we have views on that, but I've actually veered away a little bit now. There definitely needs to be, I think, probably maximum of two voices,
Mm,
maybe a third if you've got a goalkeeper coach or
yeah.
somebody who's running set pieces, right?
Set
So
pieces. Yeah.
maybe across three coaches. But I think the way in info that's delivered from assistant coach is completely different to the head coach. So the head coach's role is to I guess make sure the vehicle, we use analogy again, stays on track in that game. And if the vehicle veers off because the team are performing poorly, it's their job to be able to get information to the team to get them back on track. The
Yeah.
assistant coach then I think comes in with specific details around individual players. So if the head coach is talking about adjusting a certain tactical setup because you're getting overloaded on one side and you need the team to start 10 yards closer to the right hand side, that's their opinion to move people around. The details then, I would say the assistant coach comes in with like, talk to the centre half there. When the player gets the ball at his feet, just think about your drop off and your timing of your drop off. Little bite sized bits of info to help each individual player within that system. You shouldn't have an assistant coach like overpowering the head coach, in my view. Like that
Yeah.
undermines messages. And I think that's the head coach's role to get that vehicle throughout that game. But the
Yeah.
little bits of detail that are given, in which I call drive-bys, or sometimes you have to reach a play the other side of the pitch, like
Yeah.
just becomes very subtle bits of info about body shape, about timing, how it connects to the vehicle.
Yeah. It's interesting because thinking in preparation for this podcast episode, this chat, and also when you're speaking now, it's challenging me to think about doing things differently because in my current role where I'm to all intents and purposes the kind of the assistant coach, I would say, and where the lead coach says does the halftime talk, gives the general information, and then it'd be passed to me, and then I will like reinforce those messages, but with individual things as well. In like, it's challenging me to think that maybe I shouldn't, and maybe
Mm,
just focus on the individual chats. And I do like those individual chats because sometimes as the players are walking off, it's just on the side of a pitch, it's not in a stadium,
yes.
anything like that. Like as the lead coach is about to speak to general, I'm like grabbing individual players really quickly just with little bite-sized information. And after the talk and as they're heading back out, again, I'm just nabbing a couple of players and giving just those little details, detailed information. Um, but I guess, yeah, I suppose
Uh, yeah,
it can
I think
work
it's
in a few
I've
different
had a
ways.
couple of examples of both, but I think
Mm.
obviously the main thing we didn't speak about is like during the game, the assistant coach is there to
Yeah,
give insights to the head coach. So like
yeah,
you're
yeah,
constantly talking, and even when when I was physical performance at London, like used to come down the
yeah,
touchline and say like, what's your thoughts here?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
to like give your views, and you might also be the earpiece and the link to the analyst if you do have fortunate enough to
yeah,
have an analyst in the stands and you're at a certain level. But like give your views to head coach. I've seen it work well when I worked with the 15-16s at QPR. I got on really well with a guy called Liban. I know you know him really well.
yeah,
We were completely different in personality actually, but we had an alignment on football. So it works nice. But I would only say something on a training night or to the group this is, or in games, if I felt that the points that we discussed, he didn't deliver all of those points that was going to help the players. So
yeah,
like there was a pre-agreement to say, like, if you think there's something essential the group need to know that I didn't cover, please tell them. So
yeah.
I
I
think
like
I
that.
must have spoke like 5 or 6 times on a group level across that match across matches. But yeah, it's easy to put your point in, and sometimes you're saying the same thing, and that's again that's watering down the message because you might say it's
Yeah,
slightly different, and people can only take in certain bits of info.
yeah, because in ways it's really good because you're reinforcing what they're saying. So that it looks like like if you're and I had it during the week. My FA tutor was down watching training, which is good. Paul Holder, great guy. Um,
Congrats on the B.
Thank you, UEFA B. Thank you.
Nice.
It took a little bit of while, but anyway, but it looks great because there's alignment between the both of you, and that you're reinforcing the messages and reinforcing what the other person is saying. So that's great. But like if you think about okay, but ultimately we're here for the development and the performance of the players. You are slightly diluting it because you're just kind of saying what the other person said,
Yeah,
and it'll always be in a slightly different way, because it's not going to be word for word. Whereas I like what you said about if there's something critical that was forgotten by the first person, which always happens, often happens, then you're chipping in with that because you think, well, that's a critical point, and maybe if it's not worth saying anything, maybe don't.
yeah.
Maybe it's more impactful that you speak on a team level when there's something properly important to say, along with kind of individual bits. The other thing, yeah,
I was going to say the one thing we haven't like addressed, and because we've addressed it, we're getting on really well as head coach and assistant head coach. Is that like the big no is don't talk like against the info that's going from the head coach or start speaking things that are completely opposing to what the head coach wants or what the
yeah,
organization want. That can cause a problem, and I've seen that happen as well.
yeah, yeah. I know. Listen, I've experienced that as well myself. On probably on both ends where there's somebody I'm working with who's giving a different message, but also even, and I tried not to do it, but when somebody like I just did not agree with a lot of the messages, and I had to
Yeah,
speak to some of the players separately, and it's just a bad situation.
yeah,
It can't really work. Um, I do like I remember during my time with London where people on the sideline would get like quite hot and bothered and be shouting at different things, or the referee, or just our
yeah,
players, or and I always tried to think myself, and I always tried to say to them was like, use the time to think about how can I actually affect this game. So like I'm thinking of maybe the assistant coach, might be standing back a little bit and just saying to the head coach, it could be about a substitution, it could be a tactical move, it could
yeah,
be, for instance, like focusing on the opposition about what formation they're using, or some of their danger men, or they need to nullify that threat move, like they're coming down the left hand wing more and they're overloading over here. So it's like those critical points of information that can actually make an impact on the whole performance.
yeah. Agreed. And keep the emotion, out. Keep the emotion like yeah. You see a lot of staff. I see staff physios and everyone like shout
Yeah.
at the ref. I just think that's more of a head coach like setting precedents, but as assistant coach, you've got to you've got to like reinforce that as well. Like, yeah, stay calm and deliver how you want to deliver.
Yeah, yeah. And like sometimes either the head coach or the assistant coach might need to kind of motivate the team. You know, there are moments where you're just trying to, get a bit of energy in the team and it might require a bit of shouting and stuff like that. But
Yeah,
like again, that should be a deliberate decision on your behalf that I need to G up the players here and
yeah,
get them
yeah.
going a bit. Yeah.
100.
Okay, cool. So then just around supporting player development, and I think this is really interesting as kind of dipping into our IDP, individual player development plans. So what role can an assistant coach play in observing players and supporting their development then across the season within the whole setup?
Yeah, I think this depends on the level and the resource you have available, which
Mm.
can break things down a bit different. But I think essentially, like if you just got two of you working with a team, like you would split the players, like from a accountability of IDP perspective. So you get, I guess, slightly less ratios and you get a bit more time with half the group as opposed to the full group. And you would then own that process around the players that you own. If you're able to have two or three selectors or coaches within a program and a head coach on top, then I think you're in charge of that IDP process where you can say, I'm going to take backline, you take midfielders, you take wide players, and you take frontline. Like if you're able to go to that level and manage that process really well with the staff in the building, you might even have somebody who's a physical performance coach who has a really good skill set around coaching that you can utilize them for some players. So I think on a training night, you must have opportunity to work with those players in a unit setting. But all round, when training's going on, it's your job, as we spoke about with the drive-bys and the IDP bits of info, to not only work on your unit, but like knit together everyone's IDPs within training. So the head coach will be focused on the theme of the session, which might be playing forward, might be like running beyond the back line, for example. But then your role, and he'll create that session to do that. Your role is to then tap into specific individuals that need work along that theme. So there might be a midfielder that doesn't recognise the trigger to run beyond. So you'll be helping them with that during the session. There might be a frontline player who doesn't create the movement to come forward to create the space. You'll be working on that. So like your brain has got to be working on all these little nuances that are going to help the session get better.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And even like sometimes on a basic level as well, like it might be an attack focused training session. The theme of the session might be an attack. So the head coach is like focus on that, and you might be required just to like take the other team, where
Yeah,
it's not the focus. You like the defensive setup, but obviously within the session the defense needs to be set up correctly, and also it's an opportunity for you to like speak to those individual players as individuals and also the defensive unit and get across a number of little coaching points that are important but maybe not critical to that training session.
yeah, and even sometimes if you're doing some shape stuff and you're setting the team up to be the opposition, it's really important that the second team, 15, 11, they actually act as the opposition. So
Yeah.
like if that's how you're going to prepare, you know how they're going to play, you know how they build, you know how they defend, and you coach that team to give the starting team or the team that you're working on the best chance to get prepared, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, great. Just briefly then in that section of supporting players, so I know like a physio can fulfill this role, obviously, and they kind of become like the squad psychologist or something like that, and even maybe the sports scientist or S&C coach, even though they're often the ones who are pushing the players. But can the assistant coach become like that link between the players and the head coach, and that maybe helps kind of build trust within the squad?
Yeah, I think it's really dependent on the head coach's characteristics.
Mm.
Because I think if you've got a head coach who, like, I think of who can I think of here? Probably someone like you, who I would say connected with the players quite well
Mm.
and would have regular discussions. It wasn't like stiff upper lip. It wasn't like I'm the manager, like don't come. I think then the assistant coach can then bounce between being like a little bit firm with standards at times, but then
Yeah,
also supporting that process. Whereas
yeah,
if you've got an old school manager that you just don't see, until they come and step in and give you the inspirational speech, then I think the assistant coach has to be the one in this day and age that knits everything together. Um, and then like signpost them to various staff members or external things if there's a bit of an issue. So yeah, there's different ways of doing it. You definitely need a good connection as assistant coach. Like you're not there to be the one that it just doesn't be seen. You're there living it, breathing it. If anyone's got an issue that they don't want to take to head coach, they should come to you.
Yeah.
But I think you can tone that up and down based on where the head coach is.
Yeah, and I suppose it does matter as well, the personality of the assistant coach. That we've all come across these assistant coaches who are like military guys who, are constantly pushing the players and, exerting the standards. And like you say, it allows the head coach to be a little bit more personal with the players, an arm around the shoulder sometimes. And
Yeah,
also it can happen the other way
yeah.
round as well. Um,
I think there's many ways you can do it. And
yeah.
sometimes like having two similar characteristics that both of them can
Mm,
dial things up, dial things down at the right time, I think works really well. But I think for the effectiveness of the head coach, there needs to be something slightly different with how they approach certain situations. And that goes like about how you're going to affect the team when you need to be driven, how you're going to get messages across. Like it should be that person that can have the biggest effect when needed.
yeah, yeah, agree completely. Okay, lastly then, and we'll just touch on this because we've spoken briefly about it, but just as regards kind of analysis and operations and other roles sometimes of the assistant coach. So aside from the coach, like within the setup, I suppose, what are some of the other little additional things that the assistant coach might have to do, or what roles and responsibilities they might have to fulfill?
Yeah, I think the assistant coach typically is always really well organized. So,
Mm,
like, because the head coach has so much going on in on their plate, they need,
yeah,
like we said about game day, you need to take the stress away from the head coach really and let them deliver like their job. So, organization of like, training logistics, messages out to players, I think should come from assistant coach. All same messages that the head coach wants to be delivered, all that logistic stuff, the training list, the training numbers. If you need to grab some from reserves or junior players to come and train up, you're the communicator amongst them coaches. So I think that's really important. And I also think you've got an opportunity to do a little bit more opposition analysis, do a little bit more analysis and feed some stuff back into head coach, do some one-to-ones with players around analysis, but then work with the support staff. Like do your MDTs. I think the assistant coach should run practically like really detailed MDTs with all the staff, and
yeah,
then key messages. If you're in if you're a big organization where you've got heads of department, the assistant coach will go together and talk to the head coach. But if
yeah.
not, I think like to just make things really efficient, assistant coach gets the info, takes it to head coach. Any challenges, then assistant coach can go back and forth and have a chat. But you're the one that gathers information across that organization.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think nobody knows until they step into a head coach role or a manager role, like the amount of responsibilities that head person has, like away from the training pitch and away from the matches, like dealing with the executive or the committee, or it could be recruiting players, decisions on their players. Like there's so much other stuff that has to be done. And even in terms of like dealing individually with players, you'll constantly be getting phone calls and messages, or in the football world, the agents, obviously, or family members, for instance, at a lower down underage level. So you're right in that the more jobs that the assistant coach can kind of take away from the head coach in terms of like the logistics and the organizing and communication can really help the setup then overall.
Yeah, and I guess I guess like when you've been in a head coach position or like a head of department position, like your appreciation of what people do around you is even better. So sometimes people going from head coach back into assistant coach role can be really like beneficial. And how many times do you look at like in life this is the people look at their bosses and say, I don't know what they do, like I'm doing
Yeah,
all the work. But like the pressure that you have for comms to
yeah,
stakeholders to bigger strategic things, like never assume that their job's easy because like
yeah.
it's definitely not.
Yeah, they're harder than anything. Yourself and Liban with the under 15s QPR team, you were lucky because you had Jason Park to come in and to support the setup. What role did he fulfill?
Um,
Inspiration.
we were lucky and he was lucky because he got to work with us as well. So So he was transitioning obviously from playing, and he took up a technical director role in career, but he hadn't got
Oh,
any coaching badges. So he
right.
was yeah, I mean he had a job over there for life, I think. I think he's still at the club now. But yes, he came in to do his coaching license, and what a really nice, humble guy.
Wow,
Like
incredible.
would be really honest and open. Like did not have any confidence in coaching groups.
Yeah,
So one of the biggest things was just making sure, and he'd been in front of like some amazing, like big time managers and played under some really good coaches. So Alex as one of them. So his journey was like, can we get him like confident to deliver in a language that's not his first language to a group
yeah,
of kids? And
yeah,
then also, can we tap into his strengths? Like, can he take some of the fullbacks and some of the white players and like impart some of his knowledge that he's got? So it was a fantastic experience, and yeah, he took us out to a nice Korean restaurant at the end, say thank you, and yeah, a really nice guy. I think his humility was probably the thing that shone through.
Isn't it amazing? Like he won the Champions League under Alex Ferguson, playing alongside Rooney and Ronaldo, was given a marking job of Messi, like is a national hero in South Korea, and yet he didn't have confidence, let's say, coaching in front of a group, and obviously in true English and stuff like that. Like it just shows that for everyone out there, that might lack a bit of confidence in front of a group and a team and everything, that yeah, you're definitely not alone in that.
No, no, and the more you do it, and the more experience you get, and the more, I guess, the more secure you are in what you're delivering, like your knowledge underneath, and like the better you get, then
Yeah.
everyone's improving all the time. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Great. Very interesting. Thank you for that, Ross. Really enjoyable as always. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
brilliant. Thanks, Kiers. Thanks, everyone.
The Locker Room podcast is brought to you by the people from DSS Coaching. I'm Ciaran Deely. We run an online CPD service for Gaelic games coaches. If you want to sign up to our services, where we provide weekly and daily coaching resources for our 700 strong group of coaches, community of coaches, head over onto our website www.dsscoaching.ie. By listening to this pod, by being a supporter of this podcast, you can get 20% off your first monthly or annual subscription. Use the coupon code POD20, that's POD20, to get 20% off our membership services over on dsscoaching.ie. I'm Ciaran Deely from the Locker Room Podcast.